Today, it's my great honor and pleasure to receive Dr. Alan Beck. Dr. Alan Beck received his doctorate in animal ecology from the Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. He has studied the ecological and public health implications of dogs in Baltimore, St. Louis, New York, and along the United States-Mexican border. His book, The Ecology of Stray Dogs, a study of free-ranging urban dogs, is considered a classic in the field of urban ecology and was republished by Purdue University Press in 2002. Together with Dr. Aaron Katcher, he co-authored the popular book Between Pets and Peoples, The Importance of Animal Companionship, first published in 1983, then revised in 1996. Also with Dr. Aaron Katcher, he edited the book New Perspectives on Our Lives with Companion Animals. Dr. Beck has published numerous articles on the nature of our relationship with animals and is a founding member of the Delta Society. Dr. Beck directed the animal programs for the New York City Department of Health for 5 years and was then the director of the Center for the Interaction of Animals and Society at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine for 10 years. In 1990, Dr. Beck became the Dorothy N. McAllister Professor of Animal Ecology and Director of the Center for the Human-Animal Bond in the School of Veterinary Medicine, Purdue University. That center was established to develop a comprehensive understanding of the relationship between people and their companion animal. So now let's listen to what Dr. Beck had to tell us.
And neither did we. But I would love, looking at it, and I even used to walk to the Jamaica Bay, area, which is really almost a dump site, and just to watch the birds and even the rats. It was just one of my interests. It really was. I love seeing novel things, new things.
And I think that what interested you particularly in the rats in the dump in Brooklyn was that you can see their behavior without any outside interference.
That's true. Actually, dog studies, people don't realize it. And there's been, a lot now, there are lots of dog studies. Dogs, more like other kinds of animals, are so used to seeing people that they don't change their behavior as long as you just stay a little away.
Yeah.
And also don't, and just, so if a dog started looking at me, I would just look away or turn around or look bored. And the dog would just continue doing whatever he or she was going to do. So it's kind of fun that way.
Okay, but rats were different.
Well, rats, you have to stay further apart or they'll run away.
Yeah.
But if you stay, a reasonable part away, you can watch them play and do their things and scavenge. So they're kind of, nice in their own way.
So you were talking about dogs. I think that your doctoral dissertation was about stray dogs, wasn't it?
Yes, that was a new thing. I was always interested in nature, and after I graduated undergraduate school and taught high school for 2 years, I wanted to, really see what the world was about. And so I got accepted to a school in California, Cal State LA, so I could really start seeing, nature. And it turns out that the major professors for a master's, he was a botanist who studied fire ecology, the effects of fire on prairie animals, prairie plants. And so I did work with him. I did my research actually in the prairies of Wisconsin. And after finishing 2 years and a thesis on deer and prairie rodents, I told him, I said, I ought to try to think about other animals, work up the food chain. Maybe I should study wolves. And he had a friend when they were in the army together, and we tracked this person down, a great mammologist named Ed Gould, who was at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And I was going to study wolves, and he had training grants at Hopkins. And he wrote to me a letter, a one-page letter. He was a calligrapher. He still is. He does all kinds of artwork. He's retired, though. And he said, instead of studying, wolves or wild animals, if I did something that was more directly applied to human issues, I could be fully funded, And so he says, why don't you study the dogs of Baltimore? Baltimore has lots of stray dogs, and I'll tell you why. Why don't you study the dogs of Baltimore? You can pretend they're wolves, and this way you can get paid for your doctoral work. So I became a dog person. And I studied the dogs of Baltimore as if they were a wild animal. I used wildlife methods, photo recapture, following individual focus groups. Baltimore has lots of townhouses where people have direct access, both front and back, to the streets. So people let their dogs out much more than, say, big cities would have high rises and can't let your dog down an elevator. But if you have a stairway right to the ground, even on the second floor, dogs really were enjoyed. So when I say stray dogs, I really mean straying dogs. Okay. Many of them were actually
they were not really stray dogs. They lived in a household.
But they spent many of their hours totally as a street animal.
And what were the main conclusions of your research?
Well, the main conclusions is they formed real areas, just like wild dogs. They expanded their area when food was a little bit less available. And you could actually see this during garbage recycle. As the garbage accumulated, they would stay in that area. And then when there was time when the material was recycled, then they would migrate out to other areas where the trash wasn't recycled yet. So, I mean, you could see, those kinds of flexible behaviors. They formed really, we also found true wild dogs, as dogs that were born in the streets. Yeah. They formed small groups, just unlike wild dogs. I never saw two females as a stable group. But you see male and female, female, male, and males together. So that was a
stray dogs area. With a household and stray dogs that are really stray dogs. This behavior was.
And it was interesting, though. The dogs learned to exploit the environment. So if it's hot, they knew where the shade was. They learned how to use trees and bushes. Okay. And the dogs of Baltimore it was like the wild dogs on the. In wild, they're so used to us that you can actually watch the dog behavior without changing its behavior. And so it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of people who fed dogs, just like people who feed cats. So all of that, and I put together a thesis and then a book on just what at least U.S. urban dogs are like. This is very different in developing countries and so on. But that's not too surprising.
So now, okay.
No, so I got more and more interested in also the public health and humane issues associated with dogs, in terms
and that's how you ended up director of the Bureau of Animal Affairs for the city of New York, where you spearheaded, if I may say so, the New York poop scoop law that was adopted in 1978. So in a way, maybe it's a little thanks to you that if now in major cities, people are picking up the poop of their dogs, because you were part of that movement in New York City. What can you tell us about the poop scoop law?
Well, at that time, the mayor, Ed Koch, really wanted, because there was a lot of people complaining, and it people were really, I didn't want people to not like dogs or dog people, but they really should clean up after their dog. And my major role was to try to explain to animal owners that this is really good for them. One, it cuts down the disease from dog to dog. It also makes them more welcome in the community. And so that was our major area. I would go to all the dog clubs and so on and talk about it. The New York Post, a local newspaper, once accused me of making dog poop my bread and butter, which I thought was kind of funny.
It was a good line.
It is a good line. And,
but was it a big fight? Was there a lot of resistance?
Well, yes. It's funny. Like everything in the U.S., there's extremes on both ends.
Yeah.
So there were groups of Children Before Dogs and a group who really felt that we've got to control dog poop. And of course, extreme dog owners who viewed this as an attack on dog ownership, which of course it wasn't. And so yes, I was at a meeting where people threw dog waste at the speaker. I was actually
among the speakers.
No, at that time I was just sitting right in front, so it went over me. I was spared.
Good for you.
But this is how much anger there was about it. It's funny because now it's almost
it's
acceptable.
Top of the nail. No one thinks about it. It's
right.
The contrary. If you see some dog poop, you say, "Hey, how is it?" And if you see the person, that's what I do. I tell the person, "You have to pick up. You have to pick up."
Of course. I mean, just like you wouldn't throw trash down on the ground that you were holding.
That's it.
Right. And it's of course
up to the late 70s or maybe 1980, you were looking into the problems that animals can cause, but then you change your perspective. What happened in 1980? So you stop looking into the problems that animals can cause, and you look into the relationship between people and their pets.
Yeah, towards the end of 1980s, the University of Pennsylvania, which I didn't know about at the time, was developing major grants for the first center to look at the human-animal bond, to look at what people and animals are doing together. Veterinary schools are only looking at animals, and medical schools are only looking at people. So this veterinary school decided they would try to develop it. And unbeknownst to me, I was being looked at as someone who could play a role in that. And I met, I was introduced to and met people like Leo Bustad, who was at that time no longer with us. He was the dean at the Washington State University Veterinary School. And he's the one who actually started the concept of the human-animal bond. And his colleague, a psychiatrist, Mike McCullough, and they started developing what was the Delta Society. Delta meaning a point of people, environment, animals. And it was to see to study our relationship with animals in a more scientific way. And I was asked to be part of the Delta Society. I was one of the board members. It's now called Pet Partners. They've evolved over the years. And so I got even though I was brought in as the sort of the curmudgeon, the person who was doing public health and the problems of dogs and bites and diseases, I was brought in really as I would be the one person who would at least give some voice to the problems, because there are always problems with things. But I really started appreciating the positive that we have with animals. Remember, it was not part of my life, but I was beginning to really appreciate it. And then I finally left the health department after about 5 years and went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Philadelphia.
And you met Aaron Katcher.
And Aaron Katcher was there already. He's been there for many years. And while he was a psychiatrist who studied stress and cardiovascular disease and so on, he was always interested in the animal connection. And with the new center and with me there, he started working in that area, and I started working in that area. He had a student named Erica Friedman,
Okay,
who
yes.
was studying the
Survival
ways
rate.
that influence heart attacks after you have a heart attack. And she was studying things like social support, health, age, gender, and almost as an afterthought, they added animal ownership. And what they were studying is after a cardiovascular incident like a heart attack or an infarct, how many people were still alive a year after? Because that's a very common measure of survival. Because if you can survive that a whole year after a heart attack, you're in good shape and you're really not much worse than anybody else. So most of the mortality happens fairly soon, within an hour. And while all these other things like social support and health are very important, turns out a small but reasonable variance was just owning an animal. Animal owners lived, about 4% of them lived more than non-owners. And this is just ownership. We're not looking at how dedicated there was in the relationship. And so it was actually the first article published in a medical literature, peer-reviewed journal, the Public Health Reports, that showed just animal ownership was a risk factor, a positive risk factor in human health. Erica, by the way, after that, when she graduated, went to Brooklyn College, which is where I went, my undergraduate school, now at the University of Maryland. And so Aaron and I started looking at this relationship. And we were looking at when we're interviewing people with their dogs, they looked and behaved differently. They were more relaxed. They talked quieter, took more pauses. And so we were wondering.
Their voice was higher pitched.
Yeah, higher pitch. Like if I was talking to you, I'd talk like this, but when your dog was in your lap, I'd say, "Hi, how are you?"
Yes.
I would go higher, as if the dog really, cares. And so that's what gave us the idea that since they looked more relaxed, are they more relaxed? And remember, this is the early 80s. We don't have the fancy medical chemical tests that we have now, like for oxytocin. So we use just basic blood pressure. And sure enough, when you are talking to a dog compared to talking to a person, you talk quieter, you relax quieter, and you have a slight but predictable drop in blood pressure. Not enough so this is curing, hypertension, but it is showing that there is a relaxation response in just talking to or petting an animal in a comfortable way, a normal relationship. And so that started the various areas of study.
If I may ask you, for a long time, even before you did your research with Aaron Catcher, we saw people talking the way you just described to their dogs. It's something that had been seen by a lot of people.
Sure.
How is it that before you and Aaron Catcher, no one made the obvious connection that when people talk to their dog, let's say just dogs, they change,
Sure.
Why is it that the connection and the work that you did with Aaron Catcher was not done before for something that was so common?
Aaron used to feel that what we do with dogs is ignored because it's so pervasive. When something is just so common, it just doesn't capture our imagination. It's interesting. There was somebody who used to study children and child conversation with parents and so on. And she noticed that, yes, you see the same drop in volume, increase in pitch, and pauses, sometimes pauses to allow the imaginary response from the dog or the child, or to actually supply the response. So you might want to say, "Oh, it's cold here. Okay, I'll turn on the heater." You do both. It's a pseudo dialogue. But Harriet Oster, what she noticed, she says, but when you talk to an animal, there's one big difference between talking to an animal and talking to a child. We don't smile or try to teach facial expressions. Unconsciously, we do that with children because you want your child to have normal social interactions, which would include smiling, laughing, because or else, that's how you get more acceptable. But since we don't really expect dogs to smile or laugh, we don't bother wasting that part of our energy. Yeah. But we do keep, we talk quieter so we don't scare the child or dog. We talk at a higher pitch because they speak at a higher pitch, mainly because they're smaller. And so we do that. And we give pause because we're thinking for both sides.
And we confide into our dogs. We
yes.
To their dogs
that is
what we wouldn't do. And one thing I noticed, I was invited to speak to a group of parents who had lost a child. Okay, the child being young or adult didn't matter. And one thing I told them, and again, it's common sense, you can repeat the same story to your dog 50 times a day, every day for the rest of your life. He won't mind. The dog won't look, here he goes again. No, you feel free. Right. Of course, the dog cannot provide the answer of a psychologist, but maybe it's not the main point. The main point is that you said it. You put it into words, okay? You said it for your own benefit. But the shortcoming of the dog is he's not going to give you an advice. But on the other hand, he's going to listen to you.
Because the interaction is what's important. By the way, I used to read stories to my daughters when they were very, very young. And they had their favorite story. And if I left words out or tried to speed it up because I wanted to get it over where it was something to do, they would correct me to make sure that I got everything the same way every time. Yeah. So even they like the repetition, the bond.
Yeah, that's important. So you studied dogs, but can you tell us something of the research you did with Aaron Catcher, let's say a fish tank and dentist?
Well, Aaron we both believed that while not everyone has to have a relationship with a pet, everyone really does benefit from a relationship with nature.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the 1980s. Ed Wilson from Harvard talked about the biophilia hypothesis that we evolved as social animals, and we've incorporated an appreciation of nature in our personalities. That's why we always look at nature and so on. So we thought of the fish tank as a way of having sort of nature on demand, and to see if some of at least the same blood pressure response was the same as looking at a dog or petting a dog. And sure enough, it was. And it had to have animals in it. If you look at an empty fish tank with just plants and bubblies, it'll hold your attention for a few minutes maybe, but when you realize there's nothing there, it actually might increase your anxiety. But fish are wonderful because they are truly, which way they're going to go is random.
Yeah.
Which, as far as we're concerned, they probably know exactly what they're doing. And so, sure enough, it gave us the blood pressure response. And then we thought, okay, let's see if this blood pressure relaxation response really has some value in a stress environment.
Yeah.
Now, Aaron, as it turned out, his appointment was in the department in the School of Dentistry, because they had a big program for people who are dental phobic. And there are lots of people who just don't get into really because they're so afraid of dental work.
Yeah, it's real.
They have a big clinic there. So, and one of the things they had there, Herman Siegel, was a dentist hypnotist, could really hypnotize people, in a nice medical, safe way. So we thought we would try, he was using hypnosis to relax people before going to dental surgery. So we had some people doing that, some people just looking at some nature, and some people looking at the fish tank. And then they would go into the dental work. And the dentist and the student dentist, remember this is a dental school,
Yeah.
The student dentist did not know what the pre-treatment was, whether the person was hypnotic induction, or just looked at a nice poster, or actually spent 20 minutes looking at a fish tank.
Mm-hmm.
And they used objective measures of stress, blood pressure, how often the person asked to stop, how tight they held the grips on the dental chair, and so on. And sure enough, just 20 minutes of looking at nature, in this case, fish tanks, actually brought a more relaxation response when they were being stressed. That is, being in a dental office, being in a dental chair.
Yeah.
And sometimes this relaxation lasted hours because he's a student dentist, so it takes longer than a regular dentist. And yet they would do it. So our relaxation with animals and nature persists at least for a few hours, even when stressed. So that was kind of fun, and we got lots and lots of coverage of that. It's funny, we actually got coverage on the same day in the New York Times and the Inquirer, the National Enquirer, which is that crazy thing out of Florida.
Yeah. And I think you did the research too. We're talking about fish tank. People with Alzheimer who eat less. And you did a research with Nancy Edwards, I think, with a fish tank. And what were the conclusion of your study of a fish tank with people who suffered from advanced Alzheimer and don't eat enough?
Right. This is by this time I'm at the University of Pennsylvania. Purdue University.
Yeah.
And we were approached by a company that makes very safe medical type aquarium. And they said, well, if you want to use these for research, that's okay. They would supply it. And I was introduced to, because I was relatively new to Purdue, to Nancy Edwards, who was a well-established in the School of Nursing, professor of gerontology and nursing. And she told me that one of the problems she has with her with her gerontology patients, especially with those with institutionalized with Alzheimer's disease, is that they're so agitated and don't seem to be aware of hunger that they lose weight. They just don't eat well. And she said nothing seems to hold their attention. So we tried the fish tanks. We just put a fish tank in the room where they sit and eat. We didn't say you must look at the fish tank or anything, just had them there. And sure enough, it caught their attention. It held their attention, which lights and television and nothing else worked. And because it held their attention and they're sitting, they would eat more. And in fact, they were actually less agitated, and other measures of agitation were improved.
Yeah.
So it appears that, and this is why it was so exciting to me, is that our love of nature, that biophilia, survives even dementia. It's so deep-seated that people can't even remember their own name or the names of their children or hold their attention for more than maybe 5 or 10 seconds can look at a true nature and find relaxation. And that's why they started eating. And by the way, that was medically very important, because that was a very big problem for Alzheimer's patients, is that they would lose so much weight, they would break bones and so on. So it was really probably one of the most significant things I've done in terms of medical care. And it was such a simple experiment based on a legitimate hypothesis that we are inborn with an attraction to nature. And so that was kind of, and now, by the way, you can't go to a nursing home or a hospital without seeing at least fish tanks, bird feeders outside, and often even aviaries inside nursing homes, you now see. So it's, I think it's being appreciated.
It's part of your legacy, if I may say so. Did you expect the important development in the field of human-animal interactions that happened in the last 40 years? You know, when you were doing this research that you just talked about, did you envision, did you expect the dramatic development that it would go through in the next few decades?
No, I didn't. When we, even, 30 years ago, we started doing the early studies at Penn and in psychiatric hospitals. It was an uphill fight. The idea of bringing, say, animals to a nursing home took hours and hours of debate and forms, and it was almost impossible.
So it was difficult for you. It was difficult for you.
Right. Now you can't find a nursing home that doesn't have animals. Mm-hmm. It really became such a common way, and that really surprised me on how soon there was an acceptance and appreciation. I mean, even now, though, one of the first questions I get from reporters when they interview me and say, "Is it true that animals are good for your health?" It's still an uphill fight that way. It's funny because the evidence that animals are good for your health is much stronger than many of the things that people are assumed are good, that are, like certain kinds of vitamins and other kinds of crazy things, complementary medicine, for which there's much less evidence than the animal connection. Yet we're still suspicious. And by the way, we should be. It's not as if animals cure everything. And there are, for many situations and for many people, it's not appropriate.
Which brings me to the animal-assisted therapy, or pet therapy. You wrote with Aaron Katcher just after your book, Between Pets and People, The Importance of Animal Companionship, which was published in 1983. In 1984, you published an article, A New Look at Pet Facilitated Therapy, which is very, very critical of, in my eyes, and I thought it's not strange, but it's like a cold shower, you read that, and most of your criticism, I think, was warranted, and, but then, if it lowers your blood pressure to pet a dog or to have a dog, well, there is, as such, a therapeutic effect, isn't it?
Oh, right. It's funny. I got a lot of grief for the article because it was perceived to be, anti-animal, which it wasn't.
No, it's not. It's not. It's just very critical of the research done in the field of pet therapy.
It's true, because very often, especially the popular press, was not very critical. They just love animals so much, especially the middle class and so on, that it must be good, and they were less critical of the data than they would be if they were talking about a drug or some kind of other kind of medical intervention. Yeah. And we should be just as careful. Yeah. Because the truth of the matter is, there's always some risk when you're using animals. Yeah. And that's okay if it's justified by the benefits. Yeah. But we weren't really assessing true benefits. Just it looked good, people were smiling, and it got a lot of publicity, it raised money for the organizations. So that's what we were concerned about.
And there was the work of Boris Levinson, and but then it was what you call is through case studies. It was just case studies, not more, So
case studies provide information, and it's important, but case studies should not be used to assess major policy, because you really can't assess the true impact, good or bad, of an intervention just from case studies. Okay. So we've got to put it together.
And do you believe that from that point of view, that animal-assisted therapy or pet-facilitated therapy has improved over since 1984? Since you wrote
yes.
the article with Aaron Katcher, do you see some improvement?
Oh, very much so. One, there's really an attempt to use the statistics of assessment, the idea of using various kinds of control, whether it be weightless control before you do it or actually a different intervention. In other words, there's a kind of sophistication in the whole field that's very, very real now. And finally, there's also been some money for more sophisticated funded research, even from NIH. So it's definitely getting much, much better. And what's really great, and I think that's really what's a major improvement, is it's no longer just people who love animals and trying to justify their love of animals. It is becoming interdisciplinary. Gerontology, psychology, oncology, cardiology. So, and it's no longer just a silly thing. So you can perhaps publish in medical journals so other people can learn about it and perhaps incorporate it in their own research. So that interdisciplinary area, which was made it harder in the beginning because nobody knew where to publish or find it, is really, I think, a very important new outcome. As well as just taking it a bit more serious. Remember, we don't take our relationship with animals all that serious sometimes. Animals are kind of the court jester, as Aaron used to say, of society. So look at cartoons and so on. You can really have a lot of fun with animals. We make fun of animals. And that's okay, because in some ways you can use animals to make fun of people without hurting anybody's feelings. Because animals don't have these cartoon animals don't have any gender, they don't have any race, they don't have any ethnicity, they don't have any age. So you can have fun with them. And so we have fun with animals. But we're also realizing that they're a major part of life. And what's important is it's not just the developing country. It's not Canada, the US, and England. Now, around the world, there are interests in pets. They may be different animals, they may play different roles. But our relationship with companion animals of some sort or another is part of the human environment, not just a cultural environment.
It's true, And it's true that it's not just for the fun of it, An animal, because the way I see it, when I do animal-assisted intervention, there's the patient, there's the animal, and there's me. Okay, so all this together, it's not just the dog. Otherwise, I would go into the room, let's say a lady with Alzheimer, put the dog there, sit down and wait, which is not what I do at all,
No,
I look at the reaction of the person, and then I see the opening to begin a conversation or to reach some goal or, develop some strategy. So it's not just the dog or the animal and the person. There's a third member in it.
You actually are finding probably the main role animals play in people's lives. See, the most important part of our life is each other. We're social animals. We benefit. People who don't have good relationships with other people don't do very well. So we really depend on each other, consciously and unconsciously. What turns out is that companion animals are interpreted, are accepted as was often called members of the family, and that's actually been studied. And what happens is a lot of the things we do with our pets, especially dogs and cats, and to some degree horses, is some of the same things with modification that we do with each other. And therefore, they form the same social support. So we get support from talking to each other. Well, 97% of people talk to their dogs.
And the other 3% lie. That's what you always.
They absolutely. Everybody talks.
2% of people who don't talk to their animals just lie. Okay.
Right. So, I mean, and we exercise with each other. We exercise with our dogs. We find contact with each other. We find contact with our animals. And so it plays some of the same roles, and especially at times when, say, human contact is less available, either physically or psychologically, animals can play that role. It's not instead of,
No.
it's just part of.
And you know what I've noticed, and again, it's not just in my work as an animal assisted therapist. If you walk on the street and you meet someone who has a dog, 9 times out of them, 10, they're gonna greet the dog before they greet the person. And no matter, you mentioned people with Alzheimer. When I visited, or I had as patients or clients, people with Alzheimer or various forms of dementia, I swear to God, they never look at me first, ever. They look at the dog. And then they would smile. They would, it's as if they became present to the moment. They were not in their delirium anymore. They were not, all of a sudden, they became focused, doing what is required. You want to touch the dog, you advance your hand, and it was amazing. So my job was to use it for therapeutic purpose, to use that opening. Okay, so what can we do for that patient since he has this reaction? Okay, work on language, work on movement, motor skill, name it. The door is open, okay? But it would have been only me, no matter how I believe I can be attractive and nice, it had zero influence on the first contact. So is it biophilia? I don't know.
It's part of biophilia. It is, we tend to assume that people with animals are nicer. It's a kind of it's called a fundamental attribution error. And that it may be an error, because, maybe you're a serial killer with an animal, who knows? We assume you're a better person, nicer person, because we like animals, so if you like them, you can't be too bad. And it actually does improve conversation, it improves friendships, and it's by greeting the animal first, you're sort of setting up a relationship that is less tense.
Exactly. Exactly. You said it, you said it.
Yeah. Well, if I saw you in the street and just walked over to you, that would be kind of odd. If you were walking your dog and I said, "Oh, what a nice dog. What's the dog's name?"
Yeah.
That would be much more acceptable.
Yeah.
And if I was walking your dog, we'd both be friends. I mean, that would be nice. So yes, we have this, and that's, by the way, one of the many reasons why, if you look at advertising, where people are trying to get you to like what they're selling, animals are very, very common.
Yeah.
Because it's just like purpose. People saw your dog first, then you. At least they see the dog in the advertisement, and then they see your product.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, because that animals play that role in our lives.
Yeah. So you mentioned some research you did or study you did that you were proud of or that you deem important. What do you believe to be your main contribution to the field of human-animal interaction?
Oh, okay.
What do you believe?
Well, obviously, I think the fish tank studies, because not only for the fish tank, but the idea of how we could use animals, and especially, that's always been one of my interests, looking at our relationship with animals that's outside the border of just dogs and cats.
Yeah.
With nature and all that. So that I thought was very important. By the way, one of the things I'm very proud of is from my dog studies is the method I used to estimate how many dogs there were. And now it's commonly used, and in one article, it's actually called the Beck photo method of actually
assessing for your PhD.
I must sort of have a little disclaimer, because while better than 60% of all US and Canadian families might have a pet, it does not mean that the other 40% are sick people who are very evil. That's wrong.
No, that's true.
We all need that nature concept. For many, pets are that nature. But for others, they have looking at animals, gardening.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to be animals. It has to be nature,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be animals.
Yeah. So we also have to recognize, and I do that as a research area too, that animals, especially dogs, can be a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, like animal bite is very, very serious, especially young people, both in Canada and in the United States.
Yeah. What do you predict for the future? You know, what is your view of the future in the field of animal-assisted interaction or therapy? And how do you see it?
One major change over the last 10 so years is that just because we're using animals to help people doesn't mean we can't also worry about animals.
Yeah.
Just like we worry about laboratory animals.
Yeah.
And there's a real appreciation now of the welfare of the animal in a therapeutic study.
Yeah.
And they have to be protected just like you would use them for anything else. And the truth of the matter is, if you do things right, you get a better study anyway if the animal also appreciates the difference. I mean, enjoys it. So that's going to be a major area. We're also now going through a period where we're finally appreciating, not finally, we've been doing it for a while, appreciating the skills of dogs so they can identify not only bombs and guns, but they can, and explosives, but they can identify kinds of diseases, pathogens. So, and that can be done in a very humane, fun way.
Yeah.
Animals that are searching things are actually enjoying it. It's not.
Yeah, that's a game. That's how they are trained, you know.
That's a game, right.
If you find something,
So
you get a treat.
Sure. We're beginning to appreciate the incredible skills that dogs have.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the areas.
Working on right now, do you have a study underway right now?
Right now, I'm on several thesis studies looking at sort of fine-tuning animal-assisted therapy with Maggie O'Hare, who's a great, well-known person who studies autism. And I'm using this time to start writing up and some of my materials. I'm at the stage where I should be putting things together.
Yeah. Yeah, true. So thank you very much for the interview. It was wonderful, you know, really great. So take care, and we'll be in touch.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.